People always ask about the piano. Not the songs, not the rooms, the piano. Like it was just a piece of furniture I happened to sit behind. But a piano ain't furniture. A piano is a kind of weather. Every one of them carries its own sky. I've sat behind pianos that felt like open fields, notes drifting wide with nothing holding them down. And I've sat behind pianos that felt like old brick buildings full of shadows. Keys stiff from years of smoke and late nights, strings humming, like they remembered things the room had forgotten. The truth is, a musician spends half his life meeting new pianos. Strange introductions, different weights in the keys, different tempers in the wood. Some pianos welcome you. Your hands fall into place like they've been waiting there all along. Others make you earn every note you press a key, and the sound looks back at you like it's asking a question. Those are the interesting ones, the ones that argue. I remember a piano in a small club in St. Louis. Dark wood, top lid scarred like it had survived a long argument. One of the middle keys leaned sideways as if it had gotten tired of standing straight. First time I played it, the whole instrument rattled like an old truck starting in winter. But 10 minutes later, something changed. The sound opened up, low notes rolling across the floor like distant thunder. High notes bright and thin, like glass catching the light. By the end of the night, the piano and I had come to an understanding that happens sometimes. Two strangers learning how to speak the same language. The funny thing about music is that most of it disappears. A song lives in the air for a few seconds, then it's gone. No footprints, no dust, just memory. That's why records matter. A record is a small miracle, a moment pressed into a circle of black vinyl. Needle drops, and suddenly, a room from 30 years ago breathes again. You hear chairs shifting, a bass string vibrating in the corner, the piano waiting for its turn. Sometimes you even hear the room itself, walls listening, air moving slowly between the musicians. That's the part people forget. Music is not just the notes, it's the space around them. The silence that holds everything together, and the trio we trusted that silence. The bass would walk, the drums would whisper, and the piano would place a note carefully, like someone setting a glass on a quiet table. No hurry, no showing off, just the sound finding its natural shape. Because the truth is, music doesn't belong to the player. It belongs to the moment, to the room, to the person sitting alone somewhere in the dark, listening closer than they expected to. I've played 1,000 pianos, maybe more. Most of them I couldn't describe anymore. But every now and then, late at night, when a record turns slowly, I hear one again. A particular tone, a certain weight in the keys, and for a second I'm back in that room. The lights low, the trio listening to each other breathe, the piano waiting patiently for the next note. My name is Marcel Redding, and if you listen long enough to those old recordings, you might notice something. The piano isn't just playing, it's remembering. There was a night once when the electricity went out. Not the kind of dramatic storm folks tell stories about. No thunder, no lightning tearing the sky open. Just a quiet pop somewhere in the wall. And suddenly the room went dark. We were playing a little club in a narrow brick building that leaned slightly toward the street, like it had been listening to music for too many years. The trio had just settled into a tune, bass moving steady, drums whispering behind it. Then the lights disappeared. For a moment nobody said anything. You could hear the city outside though, car tires sliding past the wet pavement, a distant train horn somewhere down river. Inside the club, all that remained was the faint yellow glow from a street lamp leaking through the windows. Someone laughed, not a loud laugh, just the kind people give when they don't quite know what's supposed to happen next. The bartender struck a match to see his way behind the counter, little flame flickering like a firefly trapped in his hand. And in that dim light the piano keys looked different, half of them white, half of them swallowed by a shadow. The bass player leaned close and whispered, "Marcel, you still see the notes?" I told him notes don't live on the keys, they live in your head. So we kept playing. No microphones, no stage light, just the three of us listening carefully to each other in the dark. Funny thing happens when you remove the lights from a room. People stop watching, they start hearing the bass sounded deeper somehow. Each note rolling across the floorboards like slow footsteps in an empty hallway. The drummer switched to brushes barely touching the snare, soft circles of rhythm moving through the dark air. And the piano felt different too. Without the lights, there was no audience anymore. Just sound, just the music finding its way forward, one careful note at a time. We played that way for almost half an hour. Nobody left, nobody talked. The whole room sat quietly inside the music. Every once in a while a match would flare to life behind the bar. A quick orange glow, then darkness again. When the electricity finally came back, the lights felt too bright, too sudden, like someone had opened the door on a dream. The trio finished the tune and the room erupted, but that applause didn't mean much to me, because the real moment had already passed. Those 30 minutes in the dark were the closest thing I ever heard to music standing completely alone. No lights, no show, just three instruments trying to understand each other. There's something people forget. Music isn't meant to be seen, it's meant to be found. Found slowly in quiet places where sound has room to breathe. Every now and then when I listen back to those old recordings, I think about that night. I imagine the room again, street lamp shining through the window,
A bartender lighting matches, the trio playing softly in the middle of a blackout. And sometimes if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear it. Not the notes, the darkness between them. That's where the music really lives.
Some rooms remember more than people do. You can leave a place, lock the door behind you, walk down the street and swear to yourself you're finished with it. But the room stays. The chair still sits where it was. The lamp still leans toward the same corner. The floorboards still know how the weight of two people used to move across them. I learned that slowly. The first apartment I ever kept was on the second floor of a narrow brick building. Windows that rattled in when a radiator hissing like it had opinions. There was a little kitchen, barely big enough for 2 cups of coffee at the same time. Funny thing is, a place like that feels enormous when it's quiet. Silence stretches the wall. You start noticing things you never paid attention to before. The sound of pipes in the walls, a loose hinge breathing with the wind. The echo of your own footsteps moving through rooms that used to be shared. I remember a coat that stayed hanging near the door long after it stopped belonging there. Nobody said anything about it. Just waited. Weeks passed. The seasons changed outside the window. One morning the coat was gone, and the empty hook looked smaller than I remember. That's how it happens sometimes. Not with shouting, not with slammed doors, just quiet adjustments. One less cup on the shelf, one less voice in the hallway, one less shadow moving through the evening light. But the rooms notice. Oh, they notice. Walls hold sound longer than people realize. Laughter stays tucked inside the corners of ceilings. Arguments settle into the plaster like dust. Even the piano remembers. There was a tune I used to play late at night, soft thing. Barely more than a melody, drifting across the keys. Sometimes another voice would hum along in the background, not loud. Just close enough that the notes felt warmer. After a while, the humming stopped, but the piano didn't forget it. Every time I reached those chords, I could still hear it faintly, like a ghost of a harmony hovering just behind the sound. Years pass, cities change. You move through different houses, different hotel rooms, different streets entirely. But every now and then you step into a quiet place, and something familiar returns. The way light leans through a window, the way evening settles across a wooden floor, the way silence carries a shape that used to belong to someone else. That's when you understand something. We never really leave rooms behind. We carry them. Every hallway, every kitchen table, every door that closed a little too gently. They travel with a stack carefully in the long memory of a life. My name is Marcel Redding.
If you listen closely to certain notes on the piano, you might hear it too. The sound of rooms that once held two people, still breathing softly in the music long after the door was closed.
Mama used to hum a little melody, standing by the kitchen stove. Low and easy, like the evening wind. Now that one, I remember. Not because it was a great song, but because it belonged to my mother. Every family carries a few songs around the way people carry old photographs. Bent at the corners, faded a little, but still warm to the touch. Back in Hawkins Crossroads, music didn't live in clubs. It lived in kitchens. It lived on front porches where the boards creaked under rocking chairs and the summer air smelled like cut grass and dust. My mother didn't play instruments, didn't read music, but she had a voice that moved through a room like candlelight. Nothing fancy, just steady, just honest. She hummed while stirring beans, hummed while hanging shirts on a line stretched between two tired trees. Sometimes the melody drifted out the open window and floated across the yard, where us kids were chasing each other through the tall weeds. We didn't think about it much then. Children rarely understand what they're standing inside of. But years later, sitting behind a piano in a city 1,000 miles away, those sounds would return. The rhythm of spoons against a pot, the quiet creak of floorboards, my brothers arguing somewhere down the hall, my sisters laughing at something too small for grown people to notice. Family noise. That's the first orchestra anyone ever hears. My father never sang, but he listened. He'd come in after long days with the smell of sawdust and hot metal on his coat, sit down at the table and rest his hands there like they'd been carrying mountains. Mama would hum that same little tune while supper cooked, and my father, without saying a word, would nod slowly to the rhythm that was his way of singing along. We were poor, no sense pretending otherwise. Winter winds slipped through the boards. The pantry had its lean weeks, but there was always that sound in the house. Somebody humming, somebody tapping a spoon against the edge of a glass, somebody whistling down the hallway. Years later, after the record started spinning and the trio began traveling, I'd sit alone in hotel rooms sometimes, piano in the corner, city lights flickering through thin curtains, and out of nowhere, that kitchen melody would return, soft, patient, like it had been waiting. So one night in a small club outside Cleveland, I tried something different. Instead of starting with a tune people knew, I leaned to the microphone and sang a little piece of that melody. Nothing polished, just the way I remembered it. Evening air drifting through the door, Mama humming like she always did before. The room grew quiet
Not dramatic quiet, just a gentle silence of people leaning closer. Then the trio joined in, bass moving slow and warm, drums brushing the air like soft rain, and the piano laying that little family melody across the keys like a tablecloth on a wooden table. It wasn't complicated music, no clever tricks, just memory. Just the sound of a house full of people trying to get through another long day together. When the tune ended, nobody clapped right away. They sat there a moment looking down into their glasses, thinking about their own kitchens, their own front porches, their own mothers humming somewhere in the back rooms of memory. That's when I realized something: music doesn't need grand stories. Sometimes the strongest songs are the quiet ones, the ones that smell like cornbread and evening air, the ones that remind you where your name first learned to live. Every time I play that tune now, I see the house again. Wooden blocks under the floor, windows open to the summer night, my mother humming by the stove, my father nodding slowly at the table, 8 children running through the hallway like wind through tall grass. My name is Marcel Redding, and every note I ever played started in that small kitchen, long before the world knew how to listen.
Well, the moon hangs low and the streetlights glow, and the night moves soft and slow. Now hold on, that ain't quite right. You see, I was never much of a crooner. Tried it once or twice though, every piano player does eventually. You sit there late enough in the evening, after the room thins out and somebody at the bar says, "Hey Marcel, sing us something." And for a minute, you think maybe you should. So you lean toward the microphone, clear your throat, and try to shape your voice into something smooth, something easy. But the truth is, a piano player's voice usually carries a little gravel in it. But too many late nights, too much smoke in the rooms where the music lives. So after a few lines, the singing starts to wobble, the notes lean sideways, and the piano quietly takes back the conversation. That's the way it always worked for me. The piano spoke clearer than I ever could. Funny thing about those late hours, the early crowd, they come for excitement. Loud laughter, glasses clinking, people talking over the music like it's another piece of furniture. But somewhere around midnight, the room changes, the lights look softer, the air settles down, and the folks who stay start listening a little closer. That's when the real music begins. You might start with something simple, a melody people think they recognize. Just a handful of notes walking slowly across the keys, the bass following along like footsteps on a quiet sidewalk. Drums brushing the air soft as someone sweeping dust off an old wooden floor. Then something happens, not all at once, slowly. The melody begins to stretch, a note bends one direction, another drifts somewhere unexpected. Pretty soon the tune isn't the tune anymore. It's a story now. That's the beauty of jazz. A song never stays the same. You can play the same melody for 10 years straight, and it still finds new roads to wander. I remember a night in Milwaukee where the trio started a tune we must have played 100 times before. Nothing special about it, just a simple little melody that moved easy through the chords. But that night, something in the room shifted. Maybe it was the rain tapping the windows. Maybe it was a tired look on the bartender's face. Maybe it was the way the bass started walking a little slower. Whatever it was, the music stretched out, the piano drifted farther than usual. Notes hanging in the air like lanterns over dark water. Nobody in that room spoke. Even the glasses stopped clinking for a few minutes. The whole place felt suspended, like time itself had decided to sit down and listen. That's the kind of moment you can't plan, you can't rehearse it. It just appears, and when it does, every musician in the room knows it. We ride it as long as we can, let the melody wander. Let the rhythm breathe, because sooner or later the spell breaks. Someone coughs, a chair moves. The room wakes back up, but for a little while something rare happened. A tune became something else, something larger than the three men who happened to be playing it. So every now and then when someone asks me to sing, I give it a try. Just a few crooked lines, just enough to make the room smile. But before long, the piano always pulls me back. Those 88 keys have more to say than my voice ever did. And truth be told, that's exactly how I like it. So if you hear an old record spinning late some night, and you catch a few seconds where a man sounds like he's trying to sing, don't worry, the piano will take over soon enough, and the tune will find its way back where it belongs. People sometimes ask me what the road felt like after the music began traveling. They expect a story about success. Bright lights, crowds leaning close to the stage, applause rolling through a room like thunder across the river. But the truth is quieter than that. Most of the road looked like the inside of a bus, moving through the night. Dim yellow lights, suitcases stacked in narrow aisles,
The hum of tires turning over miles of black pavement. You learn a lot watching the country pass a window. Towns appear, then disappear again, before the coffee in your hand is time to cool. Factories, empty grain elevators, gas stations glowing like small planets in the middle of dark fields. Everywhere you go, someone is awake. Somewhere a cook is closing a diner. Somewhere a truck driver is counting change. Somewhere a night watchman is listening to the radio. Those were the people who carried our music the farthest. Not critics, not newspapers, just ordinary folks who found themselves sitting alone when the night got too long. By the time the trio settled into itself, we could hear each other breathe. That's the strange thing about small groups. You stop thinking about notes. You start thinking about space. A bass line can tell a whole story just by walking slowly. A drummer can change the shape of a room with nothing more than a brush and a little patience. And the piano learns how to speak softly, how to leave things unsaid. There were nights when the music came easy, notes falling into place like rain finding the river. Other nights the sound wandered like it had forgotten the road home. Those were the nights you learn the most, because music is not about control. It's about listening carefully enough to follow where the sound wants to go. I remember one winter evening in a club outside Detroit. Snow leaning against the window, steam pipes rattling through the walls. The room only held maybe 30 people. No one spoke. The trio started slow. Just a bass moving like footsteps through snow. Then the piano laying quiet lines across the dark. Something happened in that room. Not excitement, something deeper. The kind of silence that only appears when everyone suddenly understands they are hearing something that might never happen the same way again. Those are the moments a musician lives for. Not fame, not money, just the rare nights when the air itself seems to listen. People sometimes say my playing sounded lonely. Maybe that's true. Loneliness has a sound. Wide spaces between notes, long pauses where the music gathers its breath. But I never thought of it as sadness to me. It always sounded like distance, like watching a train disappear beyond the horizon while the rails keep humming. Long after it's gone, 10 years pass that way. Cities rising and fading, rooms filling and emptying, pianos waiting quietly in the half-light of another evening. Then one day the road simply slowed down. Not suddenly, just gradually, the way autumn arrives in the trees. The trio played fewer nights, the buses ran shorter distance. The music grew softer, but I never worry about that, because music doesn't belong to the man who plays it. It belongs to the moment when someone hears it and recognizes a piece of their own life inside the sound. If If you're listening now, late at night, with the lights low and the record turning slow, then the road is still moving, still carrying those notes across towns and years and quiet rooms. My name is Marcel Redding, and sometimes when the needle settles into the groove, I swear I can still hear the trio playing somewhere beyond the edge of the night. Just three shadows and a piano, waiting for the next song to find its way home.
My name is Marcel Redding. If you listen close to those old records, you can still hear the room breathing. Little cracks in the sound, dust in the grooves, the piano speaking slow like a man remembering something he never meant to forget. But the music didn't start in a club, it didn't start in a city. It started in a place most maps forgot to keep, Hawkins Crossroads, Mississippi. Two dirt roads meeting each other in a stretch of red earth that baked hard in the summer and turned to thick clay when the rains came through. There was a gas station there with a leaning porch and a hand-painted sign. A church with white boards peeling like old paper. And fields. Miles and miles of fields that shimmered under the sun like the land itself was breathing. That was where I was born. Our house sat a little ways off the road, balanced on wooden blocks that creaked every time the wind came down. 9 of us lived there, 5 boys, 3 girls, my mother who moved through that house like the steady turning of the earth. And my father, who carried the long quiet of working men in his shoulders and in his eyes. Some evenings the kitchen smelled rich with beans and cornbread and hot iron. Other evenings, the pot sat lighter than they should have. But hunger teaches a person things. It teaches you patience. It teaches you how to listen. Music came to our house through a radio that barely believed in itself. Old wooden box sitting crooked above the icebox, the dial cracked, the speaker humming like a tired insect. Most nights it spoke in whispers. But sometimes when the air cooled down and the night stretched wide over the fields, that little radio pulled music straight out of the dark sky. Piano notes rolling slow and thoughtful, a bass walking steady beneath them. Drums brushing the air soft as someone sweeping a wooden floor. I would sit on the kitchen boards long after everyone else had gone to sleep, ear pressed against that speaker, listening, trying to understand how a handful of notes could carry so much life inside them. In town there was a cafe with a jukebox standing near the back wall. The glass had a crack across it like lightning frozen in place. The owner let me sit near it if I wiped down the table, so I did. Night after night I listened to those records spin again and again until I could feel the music turning before the needle ever reached the groove. I studied it carefully. How the bass moved forward like a man walking through a crowd. How the drummer breathed in the small spaces between heartbeats in the piano. Lord, that piano. Speaking things no one in Hawkins Crossroads had the words to say. The only piano I ever touched back then sat in the church basement. Old upright, 2 keys missing. The wood worn pale where hands had rested. But when I pressed those keys, something in the room answered back like the music had been waiting for someone to find it. By the time I turned 17, I understood something plain and simple. If I stayed in that town, the music would stay locked inside me, and some sounds are too large to spend a lifetime unheard. So before sunrise one morning, with the field still silver from the night air, I stepped onto a bus heading north, $12 in my pocket. A heart full of stubborn hope and a head crowded with melodies borrowed from a crack radio. Chicago rose up from the distance like another world entirely. Smoke, street cars grinding across steel rails, neon lights trembling in the rain, and music. Music spilling from doorways like heat from an open furnace. I slept where I could. Bus stations, club hallways, once under a piano after sweeping a barroom floor. But every night I stood close to the bandstands watching, listening, learning the language of rooms where music lived. Then one night somebody nodded toward the piano, just a quiet gesture. So I sat down, and when my hands touched the keys, the room grew still, not loud still, just the kind of stillness that happens when something true finally finds its way into the air. That was the beginning of the Marcel Redding trio. 3 men, 1 piano, a bass that walked like midnight footsteps, drums whispering against the dark. For 10 years, their music carried my name through smoky rooms and restless cities. We were never rich, never famous in the loud way. But the people who heard us, they remembered taxi drivers, night nurses, bartenders wiping down the last glass of the night. They remembered the feeling, and that's enough. Because every note I ever played still carried a little dust from Hawkins Crossroads, a little hunger, a little midnight radio calling across the dark fields. My name is Marcel Redding. For 10 short years I played the piano like a man chasing a sound only he could hear, and somewhere out there in a quiet room an old record still turns, crackling softly, remembering.